Please take your seats. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take a moment to silence your electronic devices. The program will begin shortly. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
Good morning. Good morning, good morning. How's everybody? Good to see you. Good to see you. My name is Todd Altadonna, and I'm the Deputy Chief Meetings and Events Officer at Ed Plus at Arizona State University, and it's so good to see you all. We're here for number 16. We've come a long way since 2010. We had a couple of hundred people, so excited to see you. I'm curious, though, how many first-timers? Okay, I promise you will figure out the elevator system before you leave. I promise. We're really excited to bring back this group, Coffee with Crow. Over the course of 4 dynamic sessions, ASU President Crow will sit down with our esteemed panelists to explore some of the most timely and impactful topics shaping the future of learning, from AI and digital transformation to innovation and access to education at scale. So please welcome President Michael Crow. And Regina Dugan, President and CEO of Wellcome Leap. Yes. And Dr. Jyoti Pathak, Professor and Vice Chair for Entrepreneurship in Population Health Science at Cornell University. Dr. Susan Blumenthal, Senior Health Advisor to the President of ASU and former U.S. Assistant Surgeon General, we got it. And of course, Sir Malcolm Grant, former Chairman, NHS England, and Senior Advisor to ASU President. So welcome, everybody.
So thank you, Todd. And so what we'll try to do is just get a discussion going here with our fantastic panel. I mean, this panel is like a unique occurrence to get these particular 4 people together coming in with all of their perspectives. And you know, really the question that we have is that, you know, as we continue to accelerate technologically as augmented, I refer to artificial intelligence, you know, still as augmented intelligence. There's nothing artificial about it. It's a completely constructed thing. It augments all of our decisions. But we're living in a world where we have an opportunity to work to solve a particular set of problems. And one of those main problems is the fact that in the United States, we have the most expensive healthcare system by 2x, 2 times more expensive on a per capita basis than any of the other industrialized countries, with outcomes that aren't in the top 25 of these industrialized countries. So we have essentially what one could argue a failed system in which large parts of our population are not benefited by the technologies that we have. And now we have yet another wave of technologies coming in to potentially save the day, where the US will lead in the development of these technologies. But how do we design systems, tools, devices, public health assets, public health solutions that can have the kind of impact that we would like? We have parts of the United States where we have declining lifespan, which is unheard of in our history. We have unbelievable social inequities that are derivative of a range of things, including the advancement of technology itself, which leads to social inequities in terms of access to that technology. So I know that Susan Blumenthal has been thinking about these things for a long time and has been working to help us to design what Jyoti is going to actually be running, which is our new technology for public health schools. So Susan, just give me a sense of what you think is at the root of the system failure in the United States related to public health outcomes. What's at the root of it?
Well, again, thank you so much, President Crow. Thank you for your visionary leadership and for really making educational dreams come true. And, you know, I think helping the university design solutions that address some of the most pressing problems of our time, and health is at the top of the list. You gave those statistics. Public health, you know, medicine treats one person at a time. Public health saves millions of people at a time. It saved our lives today, and we didn't even know it. It's an invisible shield. And because of that, it only becomes visible when there's a crisis. We spend only 3 to 5% of America's $4.9 trillion healthcare budget on public health, on prevention, on preparedness. And yet, 70% of the cause of disease today is linked to preventable factors. So I think it's because it's been invisible, you know, and as you mentioned the statistics, I mean, we rank 42nd on life expectancy, 37th on the health status of our nation. But public health has had landmark accomplishments. If you think about it, in the year 1900, average life expectancy was 48 in America, and 20% of children died before their 5th birthday. So we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to modernize and strengthen public health with technology to create professionals who are bilingual in public health and technology to advance the health of people in America and globally. And I think this is a unique opportunity, and thank you for pioneering this to build the very first school ever of technology for public health to achieve these goals.
Thank you. So Regina, you know, just describe to everybody first before I ask you a question what Wellcome Leap is. What is it? What does it do? What does it focus on?
So think of Wellcome Leap as a global DARPA. So the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, formed after the launch of Sputnik in the United States, has been responsible for one of the longest standing radical breakthrough engines in human history. Unwin the Wellcome Trust, which many of you probably know, in the US, one of the largest charitable giving organizations devoted to research in human health, looked at the landscape. They said, too much of our work has gotten risk-averse, too slow, too siloed. And they said, we need to form an organization. Wellcome Leap is that organization to accelerate breakthroughs in human health and to get more of them in service to human health and global health.
So what's an example of a project in this space where you're focused on public health outcomes as it might be related to the emergent augmented or artificial intelligence systems that are evolving?
Yeah, it's striking. There are many examples of the use of artificial intelligence throughout our programs. So in the last 5 years, we've launched 11 programs. We're working in 28 countries globally. And that international work, the multidisciplinary, multi-organizational, multinational work, has really informed everything that we've done. So let me give you just a couple of very brief examples. Let's talk about depression. So 260 million people in the world face depression. In the last 20 years— At least about 800,000 suicides per year, at least. Over the last 20 years, we've invested in the NIH alone about $20 billion. Still only 1 in 3 people respond. So the question then becomes, what could we do that's different to change that calculus? And here enter the most modern advances in models of models, artificial intelligence. They came from cybersecurity and autonomous driving. We brought them to the complexity of depression. And within 3 years, we were able to demonstrate systems that could reduce the time to an effective treatment for someone suffering from depression from over 230 days to less than 90 days, and reduce the cost simultaneously. Those are the kinds of advances that we're seeing across the board.
Thank you. So Susan, you helped us to, and led a group of experts to help us to design a new kind of school. A school that we didn't want to build was just another public health school, because we felt that not that they weren't doing great things, they have done great things, but that their approach was perhaps too rigid, too narrow, not focused significantly enough on technologically driven solutions. And so just in a short form, what did your group conclude that the country needed?
Well, 4 years ago, as you know, I wrote an op-ed calling for the establishment of a new field of public health technology. because we needed people during the pandemic. We needed to really bring engineers, data scientists, computer scientists, designers, physicists to public health and create people who are bilingual in public health and technology. I was very honored to chair with Sir Malcolm Grant a group of experts from technology and public health to build a school that would train people in this way to be technofluent, and that they would really be able to create a new set of, a new workforce and a research portfolio, as well as entrepreneurship, to have startup companies that would be able to address some of these problems in public health in novel ways.
Right, so Malcolm, you've been provost at Cambridge, president of University College London, one of the most important universities in the world. You've helped design new higher education systems in France and worked on a number of other projects around the world. You were the chair of the health system in England, which is a $1 trillion or more enterprise involving the entire healthcare of tens of millions of people. So why is it even conceivable that we need new kinds of schools going forward? Why aren't the schools that we have adequate?
Because the whole system's broken. When we talk about increases in life expectancy, which we've seen pretty consistently since the Second World War, although with some gaps in some nations, what has not improved is the health of the nation at the same rate. We read in a big research report last week that of those who have turned the age of 70, 90% have at least one chronic condition. And our healthcare systems aren't approaching chronic conditions anything like they approach acute illness. So of the multi-trillion investment in the US in healthcare, much of that is going into formal systems of hospitals and clinics, etc. But we know that in terms of the overall health of the population, that contributes about 15, 20%, nothing more. The great bulk of unmet need is in public health. And it's related to a decline in the importance, I suppose, of accidents and of infectious diseases as causes of ill health, acute conditions, and the increase in non-communicable diseases, a consequence of lifestyles and complicated other measures. And what we need to do, and where I really enjoy the opportunity to participate in the development of this school, is to ask ourselves, look at all the technology that's being developed for education, what this whole conference is about. Look at all the technology that's going into our hospitals and clinics in uses of new equipment, of new imaging, of new pharmaceutical products. Why can't we get that into public health? How can we develop an entirely new approach, such as that which Susan has been talking about, which grapples with some of these imponderable conditions? Understand there's a huge range of variables that we're looking at here. It's complicated to focus on whatever might cause an improvement, as we might be able to do with cardiac disease. But nonetheless, I'm sure that this is a turning point as AI and other technologies come to our aid. But a big challenge to everybody in this conference: how do we turn your attention into this hugely complicated but socially beneficial area?
Yeah, I think people don't really, I mean, it's really, it's kind of funny if you ask people what the leading causes of death are in the United States. They always say, well, cancer and heart disease and so forth and so on, when really, if you took the list of the top 5 or 10 things, about half of them are behaviors.
That's right. Well, 50% of the cause of disease is linked to these behavioral,
right,
lifestyle, and importantly, social, cultural, and environmental factors.
Right.
And we have done so little to address the socio-cultural determinants of health. And I'm thinking, if we can build digital twins of people, with their biology and their genomes and so forth, why can't we build digital twins of communities with AI and link people to the services that they need that are very personalized?
So one of the things, I've thought about this a lot, and I've written about this myself, and this is an area of my own academic interest, and that is, I don't mean to say this in a nasty way, but we're also concerned about ourselves, personally, that we will spend anything, if we have it, to save ourselves, not even realizing that if we spent some fraction of that, we wouldn't even have to worry about saving ourselves, because we would have been protected along the way through our life choices and other things, our decision making and so forth. And so years ago, I was asked to write this design analysis of the National Institutes of Health. I had only 2 weeks to do it. It appeared in Nature magazine and in the Boston Globe newspaper, and I said we didn't need 27 institutes in the National Institutes of Health. We needed 3 institutes. one institute that understood everything there was to understand about biology and health and so forth and so on, as well as human behavior. Another institute focused on how to produce technological solutions that would be available to everyone in the society, not just the rich, which is the case that we have right now for individualized health. And then a third institute that would focus on nothing but lowering the cost of healthcare. The US economy is hampered because we're spending 20% of the economy on healthcare when other competing economies are spending 10% on healthcare, leaving 10% to spend on other things. And so, turning to you then, Jyoti, so you're sitting over there at Cornell University, minding your own business, and you're running the whatever entrepreneurship in population health sciences at Cornell University, and wow. And so then along comes this idea of this new school, technology for public health, as opposed to just a public health school. Let's design it from scratch. We've hired you as the new dean. It doesn't show up on your thing here because you don't start till like July or something, but nonetheless, why would you leave Cornell University to join a pack of crazy people at ASU to launch an entirely new school designed by Susan and Malcolm and her buddies to launch off in a new area and maybe someday work with Regina on a big grant? But I mean, why would you do this? What is you were completely safe and secure sitting over there.
Is it unsafe at ASU?
What's that? Well, we require double belts in the front seat of the car, not just a single belt. So,
well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. First of all, it's really an honor to join my esteemed panelists here. I think President Crow said the right thing towards the end, that a key goal, my own personal goal, and I think what we want to achieve as part of this new school, is to really see how we can enable technology-based solutions to make public health personal. We are part of the public. We contribute to the public health agenda for our communities and for our country. And so how do we envision technology as an enabler to achieve that objective? If you look at, we've been providing a lot of statistics this morning. It's probably some of you are still in the first cup of coffee. But I'll just throw one more number here. By some estimates, in the US, we spend roughly $11,000 per person per year on healthcare delivery. $11,000. Can you guess how much we spend on public health?
$20.
Times 10.
$200.
About $200, $250, right? That's the estimate. And we can, I think, all attest to that prevention is always more effective and more better than cure. But why don't we actually invest so much on prevention? Well, I think there is clearly lots of policy elements to it. We are not necessarily incentivized just by the way how federal and local and state policies might work. But at the same time, I think the tech industry in general, when we think about health tech, we are predominantly discussing healthcare tech or med tech. We're not so much focusing on public health tech. And so I think that is what we really want to fundamentally change.
Just to help everybody, just give me, you or Regina, give me one example, or Susan, give me one example of a public health technology that has worked or should work, or we should, just to help the audience understand what we mean by a public health technology.
You want to maybe talk about the example?
And then we'll come back to you.
The communication one, yeah. So we have a very good example. In 2021, we did an experiment. It was took us a couple of months to get the experiment done, and we asked the question. This was in the time when, from a public health perspective, we needed people to understand how to make good decisions about vaccines. And we asked the question, what would communication around public health look like if we used some of the technology that was very common in the advertising industry, in the tech industry? And so just to calibrate you, in the 70s, the average US consumer saw about 500 ads per day. Today, that number is about 5,000, so about 10x that number. And so we looked at how public health communication was trying to break through that very large sea of information and how we could shift our understanding of how to do a better job. So what we did is we created over 300 different types of messages surrounding the information about vaccines. We delivered them on various platforms. We did, in 1 week's time, 57 million impressions, 45,000 engagements. And what we discovered is that when we approached it that way, the messages got through usually between 25 and 43% better than the traditional public health messages. This is how people experiment now to find ways to communicate so that they are effective in the populations. Now, the most interesting thing about that was that we took the best performing messages and the worst performing messages, and we gave them to 40 marketing executives, and we said, you choose which would be the best and the worst performing messages, and they did worse than a coin flip. So the thing to understand there is that's how people approach, in the tech industry, that's how they approach communication about products, about services, and so on. We need to use some of those learnings for public health communication as well.
Let me give you another example, wastewater technology.
Quick example, yeah.
Wastewater technology. At the outbreak of the pandemic, there were scientists who developed, entrepreneurs who developed this new technology. They went to the CDC. The CDC's traditional toolbox is epidemiology, statistics. And they said, we don't do this. But wastewater technology...
We were one of the places that went to them from what we called our crap lab, but go ahead.
but what it did was it's the potential to detect outbreaks 3 weeks before they happen and to model. And so this is an example of a public health technology that works.
Right, so Jyoti, then back to you. So why leave, and obviously at Cornell, you're sitting there and the money just ends up at your door and the hallways are lined with gold. And so and all your students are obviously geniuses or they wouldn't be at Cornell. So why, I'm being facetious, so why try to launch this new school? What do you want to achieve with this new school? And then we're going to turn quickly to AI, so.
Yeah, I think as part of this new school, again, we want to see how technology, and I'm using technology in a very broad sense, AI, machine learning, digital health, and so on, could first of all allow us to better understand what are some of the existing as well as emerging public health threats. Right now, if you look at, for example, broader public health infrastructure in this country as well as globally, we are still using PDF files to share data. There's huge data modernization initiatives across the country, but it's not there yet. We're still training our students and learners in the silos of biostatistics and epidemiology, and not necessarily enabling cross-training opportunities. And so I think as part of this new school, we want to break down these silos, really have interdisciplinary programs where it's not just people who are engaged in public health and medicine, but how can we engage with experts in the field of communication? How can we engage with experts in the field of law and public policy so that we can think about public health and public health technology in a more holistic view?
So I'm going to ask this little AI system a question, and then the avatar that I picked for the answer will then give us some answer, and then that will lead to other comments from our panelists. And this system that I'm using is FYI.ai, which we have 2 panels later on, which is available to all of you at no cost. But I just picked this particular avatar, so hold on. So give me a sense, if you can, of if you were designing a technology for public health school as opposed to a regular traditional public health school, and you wanted that technology for public health school to take advantage of all of the new fantastic large language models that are out there, all of the AI systems that are out there, what would this school do and how would it operate? And what would you recommend this school really focus on to really help us get better public health outcomes in the United States specifically? And don't give me any of your mumbo-jumbo answers. What I really want is I really want to know, how are we going to do this? So give me 3 specific recommendations. It's a big problem. I know it's not working. It's too big of a problem. So
that's why we need a new school.
Well, while she's thinking, Jyoti, what are you going to do about AI while she's still thinking?
I think we want to embed AI in many different aspects of the educational programs that we're going to offer. Just this particular fall, we are going to launch 2 new programs, an MPH program and an MSPH program in public health technology. And as Dr. Blumenthal just said, we really want our learners to become technologically fluent. Whether you are coming from the field of STEM, computer science or information science, or you are a traditional public health learner, we want you to understand the dual aspects of these dimensions. And I think a key part here that often comes up is that is technology going to inject more bias and disparity into our ecosystem? And I think that's a very valid question, and that's a very important question. And so we again want our students and learners to think from a fundamental computational research point of view. As you are designing LLMs and as you are designing other tools, we want them to learn how to actually study bias and ideally try to de-bias these systems. But also at the same time, when we are thinking about implementation of interventions at scale, how you are actually working with community and members of the community. Public health at the end of the day is about the public. So you have to listen to their needs and work hand in hand. So that's where the whole socio-technical part really comes into play.
Yeah, so it's telling me I went to SOS, so I lost my signal strength here. So if I can get a Wi-Fi signal, or somebody can give me Wi-Fi, then maybe we can figure out how to get the answer. But I think that people, you know, they're not fully grasping this concept of, I mean, yes, we're underspending in public health areas where, you know, we're spending massive amounts of resources on, you know, photon beams for this and this and this and this and fractional expenditures. But how can an AI system be used and applied in ways in which it can help a regular person make decisions? So I'll just open that up for all of us. How can that now? You know, I wear this Fitbit. I've had a Fitbit for 9 years, and a few months ago I started getting this irregular heartbeat. So then I tell my doctor that I've got this irregular heartbeat, and so then I go in, I see the cardiologist, and the cardiologist says, you got to do this, and you got to do this, and we've made these adjustments to take care of it. And so it was driven by this thing. And so then I took every sentence that this cardiologist told me, and every bit of data that was made available to me by the Mayo Clinic, and I put that into my own AI system and built my own model of understanding. And I'm probably not a regular person in that sense, but it's literally unbelievable the amount of information being provided to me by this little wearable device, and probably was helpful at addressing this now solved little heartbeat problem I had. And so how's all this going to work?
Well, I think you've identified that, you know, medicine is harnessing this for treatment, because as Hippocrates says, you know, but as Hippocrates says, prevention is preferable to cure. So what you're talking about, I think, is taking that data, making a twin of yourself with the data, and then looking into the community for what else is going on there, that AI can help map individuals as well as community services and link people to the services that they need. I think it also is being used for predictive modeling to see where there are outbreaks in communities and then create interventions that will be helpful. AI will help us in terms of training people. I mean, there is a shortage in the workforce for public health. So training people and collaboration across the town, across the country, across the world.
Yeah, I can add a few things on both training and access, right? So I think the example that you gave is a really good one of how simple signals, but tracked very incrementally and continuously, can give us good indications of change. And change is often a very important signal in understanding someone's health. There are other aspects here that fit in the entire suite of problems that we need to solve. Training you spoke about, Susan, for a moment. So here we're starting to see really interesting advances on the training and educational side. Let's just take the particular example of training surgeons. So training surgeons is very difficult. We lose about 1.5 million people annually to just lack of access to basic surgical care. We don't train enough surgeons to meet the need. Access is a real issue. So what we have developed are...
And I'll bet most of those people that are dying are from the lowest income profiles.
Yeah, or in rural settings where they can't get access to care. This is true not only in the United States, but globally. And so what we know is that the presence of a simple box trainer can reduce post-operative surgical complications by as much as 16%. That's good. But we also know that we train pilots using very advanced simulation techniques, and that has reduced pilot training by about 50% in time. And we can then train surgeons so that they can do emergency procedures and so on. We train pilots so that they can do emergency procedures and so on. What if we could do that with surgeons also? Generative AI has allowed us to build the first ever surgical training simulation environments with real tissue images generated by AI that are almost indistinguishable from the real tissue images that surgeons see. It's really remarkable. Generative AI is allowing that to be possible. And there's all sorts of other access problems that can be solved with some of these advanced artificial intelligence techniques.
I think also virtual reality. I mean, President Crow, you're using this for teaching biology, but virtual reality
But you can all see here if you go to the Dreamscape Learn exhibit.
Which is quite extraordinary. And I think virtual reality can be used to simulate outbreaks and interventions to prevent them or to respond. Crowdsourcing, getting people to put together their ideas and surface innovative solutions. And then gaming. I think there are, 50% of kids are involved with games today. And they're often war games. I think if only we could harness your talents in educational tech and create games that are promoting health and mental health and resiliency. I think that's a challenge. So I think there's a number of arenas where tech can be used to really promote the public health.
Let me see if I can get this to work. So I got on this Wi-Fi here. So here's the question I wanted to ask. So I'm designing this new technology for public health school. I want to maximize AI tools, artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence in this AI school. How can we do something with this school that would have maximum impact using AI technologies? How would the school design be different? Why is this something important to do? And give me 3 cautionary notes, just to change the question. Give me 3 cautionary notes. CBO, I'm still not getting it to work. So anyway, you guys can go to this, fyi.ai, and you can, if you find a Wi-Fi that works, you'll get it to work. So anyway, so let's just go back to AI again, just in terms of how are we going to have the school curriculum be fundamentally different than the other public health schools that are out there? I mean, what is it going to do?
I think a key component as we are building our curriculum is to precisely break these silos. We want to inject, we want to allow our learners to have fundamental expertise in programming and computer science, but not necessarily for them to become the best Python programmer. But for example, how could you use prompt engineering and to develop models that would allow, for example, to predict a risk of certain outbreak? How could you think about virtual reality as a means for training lay individuals in administration of naloxone? There is actually a very nice project that was done in Richmond, Virginia, where the public health system collaborated with a startup company to design tools that would facilitate drone delivery of naloxone kits. So as soon as your 911 call comes in, it is GPS tagged, and a drone takes off with the naloxone distribution kit, which the idea being that bystanders could actually administer naloxone before EMS would arrive. Right, so that's a very practical example that requires team science and team-based collaborative efforts and case-based studies. So these are the elements that we are going to incorporate in our program.
So Malcolm, at NHS England, what kinds of things would have been most useful to enhancing healthcare outcomes among the tens of millions of people?
That's a huge question. I would say one of the things we should be welcoming is the forthcoming retirement of one of the world's greatest doctors, and that's Dr. Google. Dr. Google is going to be overtaken by Dr. Agentic AI. I think we're going to be able to see an ability for people just as you've been trying to do there, Michael, is to use an agent like FYI to say, help me develop my diabetes management plan. Just here are some of the problems. Here are the tests that I can feed into the system.
Here's my data, right?
Here's my data. Help me develop this. And I think we can cross over. I remember about 20 years ago, Vinod Khosla stood up at a convention of doctors in San Francisco, about 2,000 of them, and said, you're all redundant. We only need 20% of the number of doctors that we've currently got because technology is going to come in. Now, he was an early prophet, but I believe that much of what we can change in the NHS and in the United States of America is breaking down the medical care silos and giving much greater agency to individuals using these technologies.
Yeah. I can offer a very specific example and in the near term. So stillbirth is a real problem in the world. If you're not familiar with this problem, every 16 seconds in the world, a child is born still. That's 2 million babies per year. Now, most people think that's a problem somewhere else. But in the state of Arkansas, there are 37 maternity care deserts, 37 counties that are maternity care deserts. The stillbirth rate in Arkansas is twice that of the best state in the nation. The maternal death rate is 3 times that of California. So now we look at that problem and we say, what can we do? This is largely an access issue. So how do we accelerate research in stillbirth to get the breakthroughs that we need and then also make the tools necessary to prevent stillbirth available to greater portions of the population? And I'll give you a very specific example. In the particular program that we ran, in the course of the first year or so of the program, we collected over 250,000 images. These are ultrasound Doppler waveform images. Normally, that would have taken a year to analyze. We did it in 1 hour with an AI strategy. First step, acceleration of the research to the breakthrough. Second step, if you want those ultrasound analyses to be done at scale and solve the access problem, it cannot be only in the hands of an expert sonographer. We need the AI strategy to get it in the hands of a novice sonographer so that we can get it to more people. Those are the kinds of advances we are going to see one after the other using these strategies.
And to underscore what you're saying, I mean, this is a new field, public health technology. Just like bioengineering emerged after World War II to solve some of the health problems that became visible at that time that we didn't have solutions for, so this new field is going to develop with Jyoti's leadership, you know, in the kinds of solutions with AI and other technologies, because it's to build the devices, the programs, the initiatives that are needed with AI and other emerging technologies to make a healthier Arizona, nation, and world.
So we're down to our last 11 seconds according to this small clock in front of me. And so I think the last point that I'll make is just that this is a fantastic group of people who are doing everything conceivable to advance the somewhat slow and encumbered, yet unbelievably successful. This is the hard part about the design of academia. It's done so many things and achieved so many things and done so well, but it's achieved those things and done so well in ways in which it then also simultaneously creates these outcomes which, at least in the United States, end up being unfair in the sense that if you don't have resources to afford the proton beam technology or the maternal health care for your fetus as it's growing in your body, well, you know, too bad for you. And it just can't work that way. So we have to find a way to help build a healthier country and a healthier world by advancing and changing not just the technology itself, but the way we teach, the way we learn, and the way we discover. So let's thank the panel.
Thank you.
Hello, hello. We're going to keep things moving. Good to see you all. Good to see you. So our next session, we'll give just a few minutes so kind of people get settled in. Keep going. So our next session is Changing Futures, Transforming Global Education and Advancing Technology for Good. So before we bring our panelists out, I do want to start with a video. If we could run the Transform Global Education video.
Even though we achieved all these great scientific and technological outcomes, no one had any access to it. And so what we have to make certain in technology for good is good means for good for the greatest number, not good for the few.
The challenge that we have here at ASU is focusing in on our charter commitment to helping students succeed, and the tools to get there fundamentally include the use of technology.
Certainly technology is advancing at a more rapid pace than we've ever seen in history. If you lean into that, you have an amazing opportunity to have a very large impact.
We have to find a way to continue to evolve our universities. We have to find a way to continue to evolve how and why we produce knowledge, or we will not be able to attain the kinds of goals that we'd like to achieve.
We're focused on where the future takes us. That typically involves a deep engagement with technology.
What we're after is how can we find ways to accelerate learning, diversify learning, using tools, using techniques to produce a whole new kind of future leaders who are trained and capable of thinking in new ways.
The way ASU thinks about AI is that there's nothing artificial about AI. It's actually about augmenting human intelligence.
We're trying to figure out these technology tools. How do we deploy them instead of shut them down? Because these tools have the ability to become massive machines that can be your personal assistant on the side.
If I can build a tool that can give an intelligent agent to every single learner and tie it into their curriculum so that they can constantly ask whatever question they need to ask, why wouldn't we do that as instantly as we could possibly do that?
I'm seeing technology going beyond the education system and making life more efficient generally.
Arizona State University is a very brave place. We're trying things that people have never tried before in a way that's breaking the mold.
One of the projects that we're really particularly proud of right now is we're building a particle accelerator that instead of taking 1.5 miles of space and $2 billion to build, will fit in the basement of a research building.
There are only 5 X-ray free electron lasers in the entire world. The newest innovation in XFEL technology is here at ASU.
It will allow us to take movies of molecules in action, so we'll be able to look at a cancer treatment and see how it binds to tumors and what it does. It's really an aperture into the physical world that we haven't had before.
This idea of technology for good, I think, is something that starts in the way ASU thinks about research. But then the next piece of technology is how it's going to be applied and what it will do to create jobs for the future.
TSMC is building a big fab. We wanted proximity to engineering talent. And ASU has the largest engineering talent pool in the United States.
This is a revolution in manufacturing in the United States. There's been a recognition that from an economic perspective and independence, as well as national security, we need to be developing and manufacturing these chips in the US.
Central is the ability to be agile, to actually scale the work that we do. And the only way to get there from here is actually to not only embrace technology, but actually push technology to the very forefront of the art of the possible.
There's no institution that has embraced technology for good as the central reason that we're advancing technologies, the central purpose of our overall intellectual design.
ASU allows technology to be leveraged for good, for posterity, and in perpetuity.
Great. So joining President Crow now, please help me welcome Gretchen Bulig, Chief Executive Officer, ASU Foundation for New American University. Welcome. Thank you.
Well, good morning. How's everybody doing? Good, all right. Well, you got a little glimpse into our Advanced Technology for Good video. Several of the people in the video are in this room, so thank you very much. Dr. Crow, it's a pleasure to have a conversation with you on stage and to be part of ASU+GSV. Today's a really exciting day for ASU. What do you think today is, Michael?
Today's a great day, but we're launching this effort to basically take our ideas that we've been generating in our new model for the last 20 plus years and find ways in which we can accelerate their evolution. And it's really, this is really hard for people to realize. There have been waves of innovation in educational institutions in the United States over the last 400 years. And I think people thought that we were all grown up, that there wouldn't be any additional evolution. We'd take the great research universities as they are, and we'd just be satisfied with them, and they would just continue to do things. And of course, that's not possible. Evolution is a core principle of all things. It's a core principle of biology. It's a core principle of social structure. It's a core principle of organizations. It's a continuous thing. And we can obviously see that we have not found ways to design our universities in ways in which we're able to have continuous accelerated progress as we're going forward. We keep encountering changes or barriers or problems or challenges or new ways of things that are evolving in certain ways. And so we're advancing some notion of new designs, new ways of doing things, new ways of advancing technology for good, new ways of advancing education. And so that's what we're launching today.
Yeah, so you saw at the end of the video a tagline or a theme, Changing Futures from Arizona for the World. You and I have had lots of conversations about those two words, for and from Arizona for the world. We're spotlighting two of the pillars of the campaign today. Obviously, it makes sense here, advance technology for good and transform global education, but there's four other very important priorities. So, Michael, how do you see the role of ASU and what it can do in Arizona and apply it globally?
Well, so the interesting thing, and I apologize to some of you that are here that are wondering, like, why would one university be so egotistical to think that it can develop things to advance and change the world? Well, of course, that's the only way the world has ever been changed, has been by small groups of people advancing new ideas, small conceptualizations, the people that advance the concept of American democracy, the people that advance the notions of new ways of approaching problems, the individual institutions or inventors along the way that have been able to do things. And so for us, what we're saying is that we have built a new kind of university, advancing on a new drumbeat, advancing with a new set of objectives, advancing with the objective of how do you really empower the full abundance of our species, the full abundance of people as learners. How do we make all of that happen? And then as along the way that we've been doing that, including this meeting here in San Diego, the ASU+GSV meeting in which advanced learning and educational technologies are commonly available, we found a way to synthesize those and put them into our university, changing our university's operating modality in a country, by the way, that graduates less than half the people that attend college, in a country that still doesn't graduate 20% of the people that go to high school, in a country that still has 20% of the people that do graduate from high school are not really prepared for the workplace out there. And so we've got huge problems. And so we're suggesting that sitting in this little incubating pocket called Arizona, in this incubating institution called ASU with our 40,000 staff and fantastic technological capabilities, we're producing some things that can be of greater impact around the country and around the world. So that's really what we're talking about.
So recently I heard a statistic, it came from one of your colleagues, Dr. Crow, that the demand for higher education around the globe is growing from 160 million to 410 million by 2030. So as part of the Changing Futures campaign, we have a goal to reach 250 million learners. How are we going to be able to do that?
Well, so here's the concept. So on a planet, we now have just realized that we've apparently been undercounting the population of the planet because we don't even know how to do that. And so we're around 8.5 to 9 billion people instead of about 8 billion people. And so in going forward, for the evolution of our species to continue, you can't be so egotistical or arrogant or just focused on our own society in the United States to think, well, the world is the way that it is and it will always be the same. Obviously, it won't be. One way that the world advances is to advance education. To do that, you need to find a place for 300 million more people to go to college. Well, you can't find a place for 300 million more people to go to college by building tens of thousands of additional universities costing trillions of dollars to be able to do that. We're going to need other models, other ways of doing things. So what we're trying to figure out is, how do you create learning environments in which some universities, not all universities, but some universities could reach millions of learners. Some institutions could have the capability of enhancing and reaching a learner anywhere, in any social setting, any economic setting, any cultural setting. How do you figure that out? And so how do we accelerate the evolution of our planet and the people living here to a more economically viable, more stable, less conflict-oriented, how do we make these things happen? So what we need is the ability to reach out to more learners. We think we found a way to do that. We think we found ways to enhance learning, to drive learning, to speed learning, to empower learning at scale. And the way to think about this, or the way to conceptualize this, is most universities are places in which the activity at the universities is going on within a physical space, actually within a tightly boundaried environment. In fact, even in a fortress environment often, where you have to earn your way in. You have to stay in based on certain conditions. No one else is allowed in. It's often critical and analytically critical of everyone else. Well, let's say that might be okay for some colleges or some universities, but perhaps others should have the capability of also projecting their learning environment out into a broader community, or broader sets of communities out there. And so we've been building an institutional capability capable of doing that.
And how critical are partners in all of this? So you recently were on a trip to India. What did you learn on that trip? And I know that one of the ASU's significant partners was involved in that, in Satana.
Well, so with our partnership with Centana, we're working to build what ultimately will be 65 or 70 partnerships with not the already well-established, perfect, great, powerful universities in countries around the world, but those universities which are looking to impact more people, that are looking to innovate, that are looking to do things in a new way. So in this partnership that we're building, we'll have, by the time we're done, we have about 30 now, we'll have about 70. We'll have about 70 universities plugged into ASU's technology. They'll be called, Galala University, which is in New Cairo in Egypt, that I visited last year. That university will be powered by ASU, using our technological assets, using our curricular designs, using some of our courses, using our repositories of learning assets and learning knowledge that will allow that university to accelerate in the building of a new trajectory for Egypt, at least within Egypt, a new kind of university also. And so we're doing this in 5 universities in India, in Kazakhstan, in Turkey, in Costa Rica, in the Philippines, in Vietnam. And the reason that we're doing this is that we now have the means to do this through the innovations that we put in place. That then will allow in those countries the acceleration of access to higher levels of education. And then each of those universities will become force projection universities also. And so what we're looking at is a way to take on this challenge of how to greatly accelerate education and learning outcomes for larger and larger populations.
In the next couple weeks, you'll be formally launching a brand new school that's going to have a very globally minded front face to it. And it obviously is going to incorporate degrees, but it's also going to incorporate certificates, learnings that will go into the K through 12 system. I'm specifically talking about a new school in the College of Global Futures. So, Michael, do you envision more of these types of schools emerging in the course of the development of ASU?
I'm looking at our university provost here, and she's saying hopefully not. So I see it. And so the answer is, let's just take that school. So it turns out that if you want to do an analytical forensic analysis of how we've ended up in a situation where we dump so much carbon into the atmosphere that we're altering the basic chemical cycles of the oceans and the atmospheres in ways in which, we're going to materially alter the trajectory of the normal ways that we're used to the planet's energetics, that is the systems on which we're dependent, water and heat, we've affected those. So we built a College of Global Futures. We built a new school of sustainability, a school for the future of innovation. We built a school for the future of the oceans. We built a school looking at complex adaptive systems, and the one that Gretchen is talking about, which is our new school focused on conservation, the future of conservation. You know, we're looking at all of these as new ways to configure academic geniuses around new outcome-oriented scientific and academic purposes, as opposed to reductionistic, that is, just trying to understand why the atom shifts to the left or the right, or just trying to understand whether or not how quantum theory actually affects the design of the universe. All of that needs to go on, but if all of that goes on, it still will not help us to figure out how we're going to maintain and conserve critical species on the planet that are essential to the operations of the planet itself, the beauty of the planet, the beauty of our relationship with nature, you know, all of these things. And so what we've been building are new intellectual enterprises. This College of Global Futures is one example of it, and these are very difficult things to do. So to answer your question, the answer is we will continue to evolve the university in ways in which we will move towards this notion of designing intellectual enterprises, designing intellectual pursuits, using the concept of intellectual fusion to design new ways to produce knowledge that's more of the knowledge that we need. If you're satisfied with the way that things are, if you're satisfied completely, maybe you're satisfied with your own life and so you don't really give a hoot about anything else, but that's probably not likely, at least not if you're sitting in this room. But if you're satisfied with the way things are, then you don't need to do anything. With one problem, entropy. Organizational entropy, cultural entropy, and social entropy, which works in the same way as physical entropy. That is, all things are ultimately reduced to chaos. And then before they're reassembled. And so if you're satisfied, then we don't need to do anything. If you're not satisfied, we need to be continuing to evolve our intellectual designs on an ongoing and continuous basis to better prepare us for success in the future. And we need to continuously do this, and that's what we're focused on at ASU.
Thank you. So I wouldn't be in my role if I didn't ask a few questions about philanthropy. So what is the role of philanthropy and private sector investment in trying to transform global education and advance technology for good?
It used to be in the United States, and I've been giving this a lot of thought recently with some of the things that are going on, that rich people were taxed 90% of their wealth. To do away with that 90% tax, it was agreed that if rich people gave some of their wealth to philanthropic purposes, they would get a tax benefit for that. There was an economic incentive for philanthropy in the United States. Philanthropy is essential to the success of new ideas and new things because it can be driven around new ideas, because it's not constrained by bureaucratic policies, it's not constrained by the trajectories of certain political decision-making. But then that means then that people actually have to show up and then make these investments in new kinds of ideas. It's part of the way that things work in the United States. So philanthropy is essential to the emergence of new ideas. Philanthropy is essential to the furtherance of gaining new kinds of understanding unconstrained. So you can work for 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 years to solve some kind of problem without concerns about whether or not the market is going to then be still supporting your ability to finance that set of outcomes. And so philanthropy is unbelievably essential to these new ideas. I'll give you an example. So this guy named Jim Simons, who passed away recently, sort of a mathematical genius of the highest order who made billions of dollars because of his mathematical genius, he recently co-funded with the National Science Foundation a project in which new math could be developed so that we could actually understand how chaotic systems like the planet's atmosphere on Earth work. Because the math that we've developed up to this point is not built to really deal with chaotic systems. It's built to deal with systems that are, in a physical sense, replicable or understandable with rigid laws of physics. We don't have the math to deal with chaos. So he put tens of millions of dollars over time. He will have put through his estate billions of dollars into new ways of thinking about new math. Now, nearly everyone in this room thinks new math. Are you kidding me? The math books are all the same. Are you kidding me? Math is a tool, is a device, is a concept, is a language, a mechanism, a logic, which allows us to understand things that are not seeable. If you can't see something, how do you describe it? How do you understand it? I mean, not seeable, even by an electron microscope. They're not seeable. We can't see the chaos of how the atmosphere of this planet actually works. We have no math tools to really understand it. We can't even model a cloud. We don't have the math tools to model water vapor in the form of clouds and how they work. We need new tools. We need new math. Philanthropy is the mechanism by which that new math will be derived, by which we will then have these better understandings, by which then we will have some chance of understanding the atmosphere of the planet, which is essential to our own success.
Recently, Dr. Crow asked me to do some digging to find out how many investments at $1 billion level have come through philanthropy, single institutions in a singular gift. There's only 4.
Yes.
Imagine 4 years from now. Do you think ASU is positioned to be able to secure an investment of that scale? And what would you do with $1 billion, Michael?
Well, what was that character Mike Myers played with the $1 billion? No, we have raised, as you know, Gretchen, billions of dollars for ASU. We will raise more than $500 million this year for our initiatives, and we don't raise.
We just hit the mark today.
500?
Yes.
We will then definitely raise much more than 500. And we're not raising that the way that lots of schools raise money, which is out of the love of the school by the alumni and their success for the English department or the library or Professor Jones or Professor Smith. We get some of that, but you know, our philanthropy and our pursuit of philanthropy is around the ideas that we're talking about in this session. It's around the ideas by which we advance the ASU+GSV Summit, which is how can we advance learning technologies to impact more people around the planet. So the answer is, you know, could we? The answer is certainly. You know, we now have more than one $200 million donor, I think 3, if you add them up, or nearly 3. And so with $1 billion, $1 billion is kind of a small number. I was thinking more like 5 billion, but. So if you had $1 billion a year, if you had $1 billion endowment, you would have about $45 million a year to spend. Just how these endowments work, because you want them to live forever. So for $45 million additional dollars, one could take on and have an unbelievable impact. You know, that's enough to advance 5 or 6 new schools. That's enough to advance the production of hundreds of new kinds of students, master's degrees and PhDs, new thinkers, new models, new ways of solving problems. That's a substantial investment, and that $45 million a year to spend is a substantial amount of resources. Now, we have an operating budget in the neighborhood of $6 billion a year, but for that we're educating, you know, hundreds of thousands of students, and we have tens of thousands of research projects and small projects, big projects, and so forth. But philanthropy at this level would allow an acceleration of new kinds of knowledge production and new kinds of devices and new kinds of tools and new ways of thinking and new ways of solving problems that would be very, very impactful.
I'm always going to continuously ask you that, and I know some of my colleagues around the table have always wanted to know what you would do with $1 billion, so thank you. As long as I've known you, you have never been one that has been focused in on the numbers game, especially in the world of philanthropy. You're very focused on impact and outcomes. So take this Changing Futures campaign, this global campaign. How do you see it impacting a student at ASU?
Well, I mean, I think that's ultimately the impact. And so as we continue to evolve the university, as these philanthropic resources come into ASU, they alter the university. So it's now easy for a student to do 2 or 3 majors at ASU. It's easy for students to work in accelerated ways, and we're accelerating ways for learning over time. The students become engaged then and aware of more than just the learning of what the historic professor wants to pass on to them as the core of philosophy or the core of history. They're at an institution which is working in a different way. They're at an institution which has hundreds of thousands of learners that are digitally engaged with the institution. They're at an institution which has a charter and a mission and a purpose, which then they're a part of. 17,000 of our students work for ASU also, so it's an unbelievable opportunity. In fact, we think we could end up in a situation over time where if we have 100,000 students on campus and millions of learners off campus, that for the on-campus students, there wouldn't be any tuition because they'd all be working as a part of not only in their learning environment, but they would all be involved in the teaching and discovery and force projection of the learning activity. So what we see for ASU students is massive opportunities to be a part of something other than just going to college. They're at an institution which in and of itself is working on problems related to community enhancement and K-12 learning. We have tens of thousands of K-12 learners digitally attached to ASU, learning at, importantly enhanced ways. Many of our students are involved in all of those kinds of things. And so we have students involved in projects of every kind, learning outcomes of every kind, projects all around the world, projects that are shaped and moving forward. So the notion of a university becoming less selfish, less sequestered, less isolated, where it becomes in and of itself a force for manifesting change around the world through education and through discovery and through learning enhancements and these kinds of things. That's the institution that we're building. And already many of our students are benefiting from that environment that has been structured. Now, this is so contrary to the notion of a sequestered, isolated, highly selective, genius-only country club university that it is shocking for people to think about the emergence of a university as a different kind of institution. So our faculty, who I hold in the highest admiration, have found a way to culturally evolve such that they have 85,000 students on campus from every family background imaginable, tens of thousands of whom come from families with little or no resources. They come from every state. They come from over 150 countries. They come from 85 or 90% of the counties in the United States. They come from over 200 Native American tribal communities. I mean, everything that you can possibly imagine. Our faculty has found a way to build a fantastic university with them. And then when asked, if you're interested, would you also like to project your degrees designed by you to other learners who didn't finish college, couldn't go to college, can't go to college, want to go to college when they're 50 years old, went to college, went to high school and, didn't finish, got pregnant, whatever. They said, sure. So now we have over 100,000 of those learners that are also attached to our faculty. And that population of those learners is accelerating in every possible way. And so now what's happened is that then those same faculty then are doing research, doing scholarship, artistically creative, literary creations, everything that you can possibly imagine, all going on at the same time, where the English faculty also has online English majors, online English students that they're connected to who had no chance of ever having access to a faculty like they represent. And so I mean, I think at the root of all this is, building a different kind of culture, a different kinds of concept for the university. If you get universities that break out into our form, and you get enough of them out there, then you're going to be able to scale education. If you don't get universities that break out into our form, you're not going to be able to scale anything. Just in India, we met with the Minister of Education. I don't know if it was his office or his house or something, because there were these dogs and these monkeys that were out in the back that were kind of like playing with each other, which I'd never seen before. So I don't know exactly where this was, but this was in New Delhi. But there's 25 million people a year that want to go to college in India and have nowhere to go, including online. They have nowhere to go. What if you were one of those people? People sitting in this room, for the most part, you didn't have these issues. Maybe a few of you have or did. And so it's very difficult to conceptualize. You want to go to college, but you can't go. So there's a science fiction series that's written for the world about 300 years in the future called The Expanse. It's 11 books. I've read those books a couple times. I've seen all 65 episodes of The Expanse twice. And one of the most interesting things in The Expanse is you have to watch it from different perspectives. Sure, there's the story and the science fiction and the technology and the evil people that have to be destroyed and, you know, all these other kinds of things. But there's also all this, the second time I watched it and even took notes about all the other sociological messages that were being sent through the story. Well, one message was, you can't go to college, because we stopped building colleges 300 years ago in the United States, and so only a small number of people are able to go to colleges because they didn't build any more colleges. And then they ran a lottery for those that were qualified to be able to go to the college. So you might be qualified, but you didn't get to go because your lottery number didn't come up. Or you got a lottery number where you got to go to college in 10 years. So the writer who was writing that, I don't know, sometime around now, is speculating that we've got a problem, that our institutions of higher education don't scale. And then it turns out all of your jobs in that time were then determined about whether or not you went to college or not. And so how do you change all that? I don't know. Maybe some of you have some answers. Maybe we're doing the wrong thing. But how do you change all of that? You cannot change all of that unless you change the design. And we are a design-altered institution working to change futures, and we've got these 6 areas that we're advancing in.
Can you put up the slide with the 6 pillars, please?
Yeah, so transforming global education. How do you deliver it across someone's entire lifetime? How do you deliver it if you're living in a place where you don't have access to things? How do you deliver it when you want it, when you need it, how you need it across your entire lifetime? Empower community resilience. How do we make better decisions? How do we help our communities to survive whatever is coming toward us? It could be economic instability, climate instability. Advancing technology for good, the video that they showed was that. I mean, so if this is almost a moral thing, if you want to really get deep into this, read the philosopher Philip Kitcher, who has an unbelievable book called Science, Truth, and Democracy, who basically says, unless your technologies and your science that you're doing has a purpose, unless you're working towards something, meaning if you're just doing it to do it, it's an immoral act. And so if you want a moral basis, you've got to be working towards a purpose. How do we inspire more revolutionary dreamers going forward? Clearly, again, if you're satisfied with the way things are, if you're satisfied with the discourse that's going on, if you're satisfied with the world, so rather than waking up every day and being shocked about this or shocked about that or picking what news venue you want to watch, how do we inspire game changers? And then this future of health, the last panel was really focused on that. How do we think about scaling up innovation? We live in a society in which health outcomes are basically derivative of your income. And so that's very unfair. And then lastly, and this is a big thing for us, changing our relationship with the planet. There's a really, really funny video, if you want to look it up, and it's by a now dead but very funny comedian named George Carlin, and it's called Save the Planet. And obviously the planet goes on with or without us. It's not save the planet. It's how do we have the planet and the human species relationship be such where we have a good chance of making it, of continuing to evolve so it's about the relationship that we have with the planet. And so these are the 6 areas that we're focused on.
All right, so final question. You're in an elevator. You have 4 of the largest funders in the world in the elevator. You're going up 20 stories. The question is being asked of you, how are you going to change futures? You have a quick elevator ride. What are you going to say?
We have to change the design of how knowledge is created, how people are taught, how people have access to that knowledge and that teaching, and we have to do it at scale as rapidly as possible, or all the things that you're concerned about are going to be accelerating in negative ways.
Would you invest? Thank you, Dr. Crow. I appreciate the conversation, and we are excited to be changing futures from Arizona for the world.
Thank you.
I'm loving that walk-in music. Get everything going. So we're getting ready for our third session. This one is Education as Diplomacy. So welcoming President Crow again will be Dr. Evelyn Farkas, the Executive Director, McCain Institute, and Doug Becker, Founder and Chairman of Santana Education. So please welcome.
So Evelyn, why don't we start with you? So you're the head of the McCain Institute for International Leadership, which is a part of Arizona State University, but you had a life before that. So tell me when you were deputy.
Calling me old?
Yeah, yes. When you were Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Defense Department worrying about Ukraine and other parts of the world related to Ukraine, what was diplomacy at that point? What were you doing that was diplomatic?
Well, I was a defense diplomat, so I was working to make sure that we provided the Ukrainians with all of the assistance that they needed, or at least that we could provide for them to stave off the Russian advance, and that was in 2014. So it was the first time, excuse me, Ukraine was invaded and the Russians quickly seized Crimea. But, you know, I want to tie it together with education, you know. We had spent a lot of time as a government understanding what Vladimir Putin was all about. We knew that when he seized Ukraine, what he was after was control over the whole country. He said, oh, I wanted to get Crimea because I didn't want Ukraine to be part of NATO. We knew that that was not what it was all about. It was all about preventing a burgeoning, successful democracy on the border of the Russian Federation. He wanted to control Ukraine again. He had had a puppet leader up until 2014. He wanted to control Ukraine again so that Ukraine would not become a democracy, so that Ukraine would not become a flourishing economy allied with the European Union.
No. So Doug Becker has been involved in the building of universities around the world. So just give a 30-second history of Laureate, and then I'm going to turn to Santana, but then I'm going to turn back to Ukraine as an example. So Laureate.
Sure, thank you. Great to be here with you. So Laureate Education, a company that I started more than 20 years ago, was created to build and invest in universities around the world. The idea at the time was that there were many, many countries where private universities either weren't flourishing or really didn't exist. And I felt at that time that while there's a...
Give an example.
A great example, well, I heard Morocco would be a great example, where at the time we were looking at Morocco, there were no private universities in the country. And there wasn't enabling legislation. There wasn't a design. I love the commitment that you have to design in everything that ASU is doing. So we ended up coming up with models to design, build, support, invest in universities around the world, but it was an ownership model. We needed billions of dollars of capital, and we needed tuition-based models so that there'd be an economic model, and that was very successful and allowed us to grow to...
How many did you build?
We ended up building 9 universities and investing and ultimately acquiring 60 universities in 29 countries, 200 campuses, 1 million students, about $5 billion a year of revenue, which is interesting because, of course, ASU does that with 1 university. I don't know what I was doing with the other 68, but we did build a huge global enterprise. We were really proud to have the IFC, the investing arm of the World Bank, as one of our major investors.
So why would the IFC, an investing arm of the World Bank, invest in an American company based in Baltimore to advance global university development? Like, you know, I thought colleges were just places you sent your kids to get rid of them.
Actually, I think that's the perfect sort of intersection of diplomacy and education. I think that the IFC has a mission to lift people and the prospects for their families around the world, and education is certainly the most powerful tool to do that, to create economic development and social mobility. What I loved once they did invest is they would go into countries where we operated, like Mexico and Peru, and do studies to show, they actually could show that if you went to the Laureate University in Mexico or Peru, you had a better chance of enhancing your social mobility, and that, in fact, the income levels of our graduates were better, even than more prestigious universities in those countries. And what I loved about that is that I came to understand that we were supporting families where the family, if they were lucky enough to afford our services, they were picking which of their kids could go to university. And that always focused my attention.
This is hard for people to really grasp. I mean, they're picking which of their kids might be able to go to the university. You're helping to build universities. You left Laureate, and then you formed a new company with ASU called Centana. ASU is not in the company formation business for just any particular reason. We're certainly not in that, because we're not profit seekers. We are interested in finding ways to partner with university development activities. So I want you to take the example of just give a quick 30 seconds on Centana, then focus on American University of Kyiv in Ukraine, and then we're going to come back to universities from the perspective of diplomacy. So Centana,
sure.
American University Kyiv.
Fantastic. When I, after 20 years, was looking for something new to do and was retiring from Laureate, I got a note from you. And that note asked me a question that just tortured me. Of course, that's your specialty. Which you said, Doug, if you had had ASU as your partner when you founded Laureate, what would you have done differently?
Yeah. How would it be so much better?
Exactly. Well, I mean, you didn't even have to say that. And so I really, really loved that question. Came out, spent a solid week, which allows you to...
No, we did something else before that. We borrowed someone's jet.
You came and visited me.
Flew to Baltimore.
Yes.
Ate crabs at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then met with you.
Yes, you did, because all good things come from Baltimore, but especially, including Rick Shangrell, wherever Rick is, but especially blue crabs. But in developing this relationship, I came out and spent a week at ASU, which I can tell you, you can accomplish a 5% understanding of ASU in a week. So but that actually puts you 100x beyond people who don't spend a week at ASU. And was really impressed and realized that there were unbelievable tools that we would have been able to deploy if we'd had that at Laureate. And I know my colleagues would agree. I had dinner last night with my successor as the CEO of Laureate, and I was explaining what we do at with ASU, and he said, oh my God, if we had had that at Laureate, and was going on in that whole conversation. So it was very inspiring for me, and what it allowed us to do, we created Centana,
using venture capital as a way to get it going.
Raising capital, but building Centana in a model where we would team with universities, either to create universities or to develop universities, but that we did not, as we did at Laureate, need to own those universities. So suddenly it meant that we could partner more easily with government, we could engage with nonprofit universities, and so we were much less limited, both in the need not to have to raise
So back
billions
to
of dollars.
Ukraine then, so back in Ukraine, in Kyiv, there's this little thing getting going, so.
Yeah, so that's a perfect example. Once we started Sintana together, ASU had gotten an inbound inquiry from a group representing the three biggest employers, or three of the biggest employers in Ukraine. Three big companies that had about 500,000 employees, the biggest energy company, biggest retail company, biggest IT services company. And this is before the war. They wanted better workforce, and they wanted ASU to come open in Ukraine. And thankfully, since we have this alignment, ASU's response to that is, well, we don't just open ASU, but we have a model for design and engagement, and that's what Sintana does. So we went in, looked, designed, worked with those employers.
As in a sense, a learning management company that links with a major, rapidly evolving American university to help this new university to be built in Ukraine.
Exactly. So those three employers and some other investors put up the capital. The Ukrainian government was enthusiastically supportive. I remember going with Provost Gonzalez just before she took on the provost role. I'm not sure if Nancy's here. Hi, Nancy. And we designed this university. It was supposed to open just weeks after what ultimately occurred, which was the invasion. It did open amazingly. There's a campus. It's beautiful.
I was just there.
You were just there. Wonderful. And
several months ago.
A beautiful campus. And Nancy and I were there when it needed renovation. This old abandoned building, and now it's a vibrant university. Small. Certainly amazing that it has survived, considering what's going on. Imagine.
And operated during the war.
And operated during the war. ASU's been incredibly supportive of it. But imagine if suddenly, for example, as a university, all of the young men that would come to your university are just gone. And then imagine of, let's say, the young women that would come to your university, a quarter of them or half of them are part of families that leave the country because they have to for their safety. So it's a great example of the most stressful environment you could create, and yet we have this thriving little engine that could chugging away there.
So this concept of education as diplomacy, it's ASU, by the way, has students on campus from more than 150 countries. And we have students that are learning with us digitally in one way or another from more than 180 countries. And that's a form of diplomacy in and of itself. But how is education diplomatic?
Well, I mean, education is diplomatic because it essentially seeds American ways of thinking, American political culture in other societies. When we go overseas and we bring, when we say powered by ASU, well, that's a curriculum and a way of teaching that we then bring to places like India. And those Indians now are starting to think a little bit more the way a democratic society, the way Americans think, and that creates then connectivity, a very quiet network in a sense, and an intellectual kinship. So I think it's incredibly powerful. And we at the McCain Institute also kind of do this education as diplomacy. We are not providing diplomas, or degrees or certificates, but we have a McCain Global Leaders Program. These are up and coming democratic leaders. Sunny Chung from Hong Kong, who is now in exile in the United States because he was a leader of the student movement at age 23, I think, or actually I think he was a teenager. I think he was 18. He's only like 27 right now. So these leaders are people who we bring into a cohort every year, only 25 people. We've got 200 now all over the world and from over 80 countries. And they are working very hard in their communities to essentially use innovation, use creative problem solving and the whole intellectual framework that they learn through the McCain Institute, and I think also through association with ASU, to make their societies better, more democratic, to provide for human rights, and essentially to make sure that the values that John McCain espoused, which were universal human rights, international engagement, and the rights of people to certain basic freedoms, that's the same as universal human rights, that they were continuing to be promulgated throughout the world.
So when the Soviet Union dissolved and new emerging countries came out of that, Doug, a number of those are in the stans, the Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and other places, massively, massive places. I mean, in terms of their geographies, their natural resources, their human capital, and so forth. So how would Santana work in one of these countries, and why is it diplomatic? So one of the things that happens in our society is, I'll just sort of put this out there, is that it's kind of funny. I encounter this as a university president often. Like, people will literally ask me, educated people that work for companies, well, do you guys come to work in the summer? I'm like, what are you talking about?
Of course not.
I mean, there's not even any, like you're talking to the CEO of some big company, and that person's entire understanding of college was the fraternity that they were a part of at Duke, and what that life was like, and the 20 classes that they took, while they were there. Not any understanding of Duke University's massive research and medical school and medical research, and all the things that are going on, and the fantastic scholars and so forth and so on. And so there's a deep lack of understanding of the importance of education to all things, particularly when it's taken for granted, which it isn't in Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan. So pick one of those examples.
Sure, great. Well, just to take a step back, our approach, since it's design-oriented, the universities that we engage with, either existing universities that want to be reimagined in some way, or new universities, there needs to be design. And this is something the ASU is very strong in doing, and the University Design Institute at ASU. That really, when I spent my first week at ASU all those years ago, that's what really caught my attention. Any university that has something called a University Design Institute, that changed my way it influenced the way I thought and saw ASU. And I realized, and you said to me, you are a designer of universities. What's amazing to me about that is, while I did it, I never actually thought that that's what I was doing. And then I came to realize that is exactly what I had spent 20 years doing with a team of incredibly gifted people. I see a few of them in the audience right here. So when we would go into each country, we're going to create a design. So, for example, you mentioned Ukraine, American University of Kyiv, because what they wanted was something that was American in its orientation. But we're an international organization. Our job isn't to make everything American. It's to meet people where they are and deliver what's needed. But I'll give you one great story that I know you know, Michael. At one point, you mentioned Uzbekistan, the government of Uzbekistan, same message.
Well, first, Uzbekistan. Who's been to Uzbekistan? 1, 2, 3 people, yeah. So it's not a well-known place. It's a brand new country in a sense. It's got a long heritage, long history, all kinds of things. But this is a place struggling to find itself.
It's a fast-growing economy. It is figuring out how to integrate in the world economy while it's moving away from its Russia orientation, but still actually very tied and linked with Russia, which, by the way, we all sort of need to figure out how to do that now. And a very powerful, interesting economy, a fast-growing young population, and so really actually interesting place. And when people we would say to people, we're going to do something in Uzbekistan, 9 out of 10 people would say, where's that? But 1 out of 10 people would say to me, that is a really hot growing economy and a country ready for design, ready for reimagining its own future. So you were nice enough to let me go to a meeting in your stead with the president of Uzbekistan. I remember in New York during the UN General Assembly meetings. And so I sit with the president of the country. He says, we want ASU to come to our country. And I said, well, we have an engagement model to do that. We will create a university. If it needs capital, we can find investors. But we need these 3 things. We need a license, and we need you to let us innovate. You can't have, in many countries, these extremely, extremely prescriptive regulations that make it impossible to innovate.
Kind of like K-12 in the United States.
And in a lot of places, it's very difficult. And we know there's a reason why those regulations are there, but it's not always conducive to innovation. I said, we need a building, and we need land. And the president said to me, if I had all those things for you, how long would it take you to open a university? And I said, 12 months, 1 year. And 1 year later, we opened a new university called American University of Technology. The government came
powered by ASU.
Powered by ASU. Oh, I mean 100%, meaning the entire curriculum is based on ASU, the teaching model, the access to technologies, all of it. And with a design where students could take their final year and come to ASU to complete their curriculum. Imagine the cost reduction to somebody who can spend 3 years learning in the lower cost environment, living at home and paying $5,000 a year of tuition, and then the final year of a bachelor's degree, come to ASU and get that ASU degree, have the chance under OPT to stay and work in the United States. Life-changing opportunity. So that's a great example, creating something from nothing, design-oriented.
Where are we on that project now?
Project is, we had our first intake. We got our license about 3 weeks before the start of classes. So imagine the very powerful marketing we could do in advance of that. But we still started with, I think, maybe 60 or 70 students. And then we're getting ready for hundreds of students coming in the new September intake. And I'll be there in September, and the president's expressed an interest in coming to welcome us and thank us for being there. So I think we're positioned to build, I would say, probably a 15 or 20,000 student university, completely, utterly inspired by ASU.
So Evelyn, how many times have you been to Ukraine or to that part of the world?
I can't count anymore. I was there, I think it was October, and my next trip is...
No, but including your work at the Defense Department, I mean, dozens of times,
dozens,
more?
yeah. Well, yeah, I wouldn't say more than 2 dozen.
Yeah. So, but on the ground
first time
a
I
lot.
went was in 1994.
So
I get credit for being old.
So 1994, by the way, was the year that the treaty was signed between the Russians, the Americans, the British, and the Ukrainians to allow all of the nuclear weapons that were still in Ukraine to be taken out of Ukraine. And for that, all of those parties agreed that Ukraine would be allowed to evolve into its own self and would never be attacked. That was a treaty in 1994.
And if they were attacked, we were going to come to their defense.
Right. So
directly.
But let's not make this about the failure.
Budapest Memorandum.
But let's not make it about the failures of this treaty to be completely implemented. But I want you to talk about the building of Ukraine. Obviously, a high aspiration, emerging democracy with a desire for a fully capitalistic economy. In your experience on the ground in Ukraine, what did you see? And there's many. I've been involved in multiple Zooms with 15 or 20 Ukrainian university presidents, trying to figure out how we could be helpful to them and what we could do, and during the war and so forth and so on. But on the ground, why would the building of educational institutions be important to the future of Ukraine?
Because our educational model is a fantastic way to fight autocracy and corruption. And if you know anything about Ukraine and the Soviet system, but even the post-Soviet Ukraine, it's been singled out as a very corrupt economic society, corrupt political machine, if you will. When I was in the Pentagon and Ukraine was invaded for the first time in 2014, people made fun of President Obama and by extension my colleagues for giving the Ukrainians blankets. Well, they needed blankets because the corrupt government had literally cleared the larders. They had cleaned them out. They were on the cusp of selling the Ministry of Defense building in downtown Kyiv. That's how corrupt they were. So the military was starved for basic essentials, and the system itself, the political system, was highly corrupt. Bringing in American education, American educational institutions, American ways of doing things, which we did through education, but also through other elements of the U.S. government, through our Justice Department and our FBI, et cetera. We taught the Ukrainians about individual rights, obviously, about transparency, about how to fight corruption, what types of institutions they can set up inside their system that would be watchdog institutions that are quite effective today. And gradually they got to the place where, when President Zelensky was elected, he was elected on a two-pronged platform. One was, I'm going to stop the war. That didn't work out very well. And the other one was, I'm going to fight corruption. And that has been working. It's still a work in progress. Look, we have corruption in the United States as well. It's like fighting for your democracy. You have to do it every day. But the Ukrainians have learned a lot from the way that we do things. And the critical thinking, the way that with the Socratic method, the way that we educate people, the way that we empower young people is something the Ukrainians have been drawn to. And in fact, the revolution of 2014 was in large part a response to what was happening next door in Poland, the European Union, those same democratic models that to include education.
Michael, can I just add really quickly a great example of what your whole message here today, because many of the students at American University of Kyiv can graduate with both the ASU degree, in that case mostly online, and then coupled with in-person instruction in the powered by ASU university. One of our recent graduates is now the Deputy Minister of Education in the country. So this is a direct linkage with how we can improve access to education, inspired by ASU and its resources and enriched with its resources. And then we have one of our first graduates with a master's degree graduating from both the Ukrainian and the ASU institutions, and now Deputy Minister in the country.
So Doug,
I can give, one other example from the McCain Global Leaders. We have, he was a colonel, now he's a general in the Ukrainian military. He went through U.S. systems of education, was also our fellow. He's now rising up through the Ukrainian ranks, having developed a professional military education from the United States, and then also learning through us about, civilian education.
So, Doug, you and I were in Mexico City not too long ago, and we were at a meeting of people that had been brought there around an international group. I'm just trying to get the audience some sense of and I'm going to pick a couple other spots. So we were down there, and why are international development organizations worried about educational attainment?
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember that meeting. This was the IFC's biannual meeting on education. It was held in Mexico City. We were really proud because we worked very closely with the Universidad Autónoma de Guadalajara and do a lot of work in Mexico. And so it was a perfect location for this meeting. And IFC, for the reasons that you asked, why did they wish to invest in Laureate? They see this, and especially they do see the need for private actors. And what I mean by private actors, ASU, I think most people, it's a public university, and most people don't understand what a public enterprise is. But ASU's design model of a public enterprise is essentially a private actor in the sense of how you can take actions inspired by public values. And that's what's so unique. But since there are very few public enterprises like ASU, actually private ends up being an easier way to get things done in a lot of countries where we operate. So that was an example of our meetings there in Mexico, where the IFC was keenly interested in what ASU is doing and has really deepened their engagement with Santana ever since that meeting.
And then in India, which is a country of unbelievable aspirational goals, what are we doing there?
So India is a great example.
Where we just were.
Of course. India is a great example where, of course, a vast country sending lots of students and workforce to the world. So the world is getting, the U.S. is getting nurses from Kerala and computer scientists from, Bangalore, and all sorts of talent. And so this is part of global talent mobility. I'm looking at my friend Fred from the Philippines. Philippines, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, these are source countries for workforce for the world.
Where's Fred?
Fred is right there.
There's Fred. Nice to see you, Fred.
From iPeople and Mapua University. So, and also my friend Juan Carlos from UAG in Mexico. I have friends all over in the audience, so I'm going to stop singling them out. But what I was going to say is that we now have a model where we have picked 5 universities that ASU has agreed will become powered by ASU to build this integrated pathway model that allows students to do their first 3 years of instruction at these very excellent universities in India and come do their last year at ASU. And as you saw from your visit, this has it's captured people's imagination, even to the level of your meeting with the Minister of Education and the response and reaction you got. Now this gives ASU essentially a beachhead in a much more, I would say, operational engagement on the ground to now look to do so many more things to bring in collaboration in online education, research collaboration, University Design Institute collaboration. So I think what you and I dreamed up 5 years ago is really starting to take off in India and in a lot of other countries.
So, Evelyn, you've worked obviously with State Department diplomats in addition to being in the Defense Department in your past, and then obviously through the McCain Institute now you're working with everyone. So what is this notion of, just help educate everyone as to, what is diplomacy? What is diplomacy?
I mean, diplomacy is obviously using your intellect, your persuasive power, facts, and your influence to achieve an objective that supports the interests of your state. Generally speaking, diplomacy is associated with a nation, with your state, with your country. And when you're conducting diplomacy, you are using all of your intellectual, persuasive, educational tools in order to achieve an outcome for your state. So you can be negotiating, or you can be not in a negotiating state necessarily, but just trying to ensure that your values, that your perspective is somehow adopted by the other parties that you're dealing with. So it's very clinical definition. But I think what we do at the McCain Institute, if I could just add a little bit of propaganda, is we have a perspective. And our perspective is, and this is a John McCain perspective, that America is stronger as a country, as a democracy, if we are engaged in the world. And if we are engaged in the world in such a way that we promote democracy and the rights of humans all over the world.
And education is a way to do that.
And education is absolutely a way to do that, because we do the education through those interactive, through those fellowships, through the alumni programs. We convene at the highest levels in Washington, D.C., and at our annual Sedona Forum. And we are constantly educating. We are educating policymakers all the time, whether they know it or not. We're trying to make sure they provide support for Ukraine, for Georgia, for Taiwan, these frontline democracies, that if they don't succeed, if they don't actually manage to maintain their democracy, then the outcome is dire for the region and for the world and for the United States. So it's education, but it's education in a different way. It's not as overt.
Doug, were you going to add to that?
I was just going to add to that. You know, the current administration, I think, is going to find some of the work that we've spent the last 5 years planting seeds around the world to be very promising. Because, for example, we have an amazing project we've been working on for more than a year in Saudi Arabia. You and I were just on a Zoom call with the Minister of Education and the Minister of Investment in Saudi Arabia, where they want an ASU-inspired, extremely innovative, modern, new university in that country. English-based, every student graduating with both the ASU and our powered by ASU Saudi institution.
So the point to the audience or to others is that it's so easy for us to, like, you know, go to the garage, get in your car, drive to work, you know, work on your stuff, and just sort of assume the world is the way that it is. Well, certainly you know by now, by, you know, April 2025, the world is only going to be what we can shape it to be, or it's going to possibly fall into levels of disarray that are nothing that we would want our children, our grandchildren, or our great-grandchildren to inherit. And so this is a constant piece of work. So let's pick Fred here from the Philippines, a great emerging country of unbelievable complexity. The Philippines are one of the most complicated countries. Islands and people from every cultural background and religious background, and unbelievably complicated geopolitical location, and a strong relationship with the United States, and an emerging economy. And you know, what are we trying to do there, and why is the Philippines so important? And why is the Philippines so important to the world to be successful? And as many of us in the room are Americans, we don't really get these things. We don't really understand these things.
We'll start with the fact that most of the countries that we're operating in, many of them have some of the same issues that we have here. Climate issues, issues of inequality, instability, whether it's literally geologic or political, whatever types of instability. Philippines has all of those, challenging, big country, growing country, and really engaged with the world in terms of the diaspora. So Mapua University, the top private engineering college in the country, based in Manila, wanted to basically imagine a way that it could extend its influence into fields outside of engineering.
Right.
And so we just opened recently a brand new medical school together. Of course, ASU now has tremendous resources in medicine, but Santana also already had a design capacity in medical education. So that's an example of a project that we did together. Incredible, modern, exciting, brand new medical school that's just opened as part of what will be the expansion of Mapua into health sciences. We have helped them in their planning and design work related to online, into moving more and more into business, management education, and other fields. And they have other campuses outside of Manila where we're also engaged together.
So the question at the end of the day is, you know, how do you want the world to turn out? And one of the ways that you can really enhance how that turns out is to take education as a diplomatic objective and make that something that you work on at scale. And that's what we're able to do from the technologies that we derive from this meeting, from the way that we've designed the university, to the way that we operate with the McCain Institute, to the way that we've built this relationship with Santana. So let's thank our panelists.
Michael, thank you.
All right. Wrapping up our final session of Coffee with Crow. Everybody, if you want to take a seat, we'll get moving. It's great to see you guys. So our next session is University Research, the Invisible Hand in Global Innovation. So joining President Crow again is our moderator, Ellen Levy, the Managing Director, Silicon Valley Connect, and Senior Advisor to President Crow, and Paul Cherukuri, Vice President for Innovation and Chief Innovation Officer at Rice University. So welcome our panel. Take care. Good.
All right, well, welcome. I think some of the topics we're going to discuss today around university research have been alluded to or hinted at during the last several conversations. But what I want to do maybe to start the conversation, I'm going to pick up on what you said in this last session when you described somebody who maybe thinks of a university in the context of their own personal experience, right? And maybe it was their fraternity or their classes they took or their favorite professor. But I'm going to venture a guess and say that most people, on average, don't know a lot about the university's research complex, right? You maybe didn't touch it, you don't know about it, never mind the outputs. Can you start, President Crow, with just a shaping of the situation? What is this thing called university research?
So it's kind of funny. I mean, so in our society, as we have evolved, the universities have become what's called adaptive organizations. So our role is to take the knowledge of the past, store it in both libraries, other information sources, and in faculty members. To take that knowledge from the past and then synthesize it, evolve it, make it available, to create new knowledge, to add to the basic stock of knowledge, and then to find ways to transfer that knowledge, both in the form of educating students and then also transferring that knowledge in the form of new things, new theories, new tools, new devices, new systems, to make all of that happen. Just at ASU, a single American research university in the top 100 of American research universities, we have one of the 50 largest libraries in the world. We have tens of thousands of people involved in research. We subscribe to tens of thousands of academic journals. We contribute to tens of thousands of academic journals. We are involved in all aspects of this. And so if you look around the world, there's 300 institutions operating at that level, maybe. Those institutions hold in them the entirety of what we understand, not in terms of tacit knowledge, the knowledge that we have as individual humans, not in terms of culturally specific knowledge in the way that maybe communities are run around the world, but this notion of what we understand about nature and so forth and so on, it's in these institutions. And so these institutions are the embodiment of our adaptive understanding of nature. And that's what these research universities do.
And maybe, can you put any numbers to like how much this is integral to the university? How does it play out? Is it just a side project over here and then we get the benefits of those outputs? Like, again,
at a big research university like ASU or University of California at Berkeley or Johns Hopkins or Columbia, where I used to be the chief research officer, it is the monster within the institution. It's the tail that wags the dog in many ways. It's billions of dollars of expenditures at some universities, $1 billion at ASU. It's unbelievable facilities, unbelievable production of thousands across these institutions of PhDs per year who are then embodying the new knowledge going forward. These are massive, massive things. Let's go back to my old school at Columbia. At that time when I was there, we had 4,000 or so students in Columbia College, a small elite honors college by its design. There were, 30,000 employees at that time just in the medical school. And of those 30,000 employees, half of them were involved in research at that time. And so these are massive, massive, massive undertakings. In fact, in the last 80 years, the bulk of fundamental research on the planet is done in American universities.
And maybe, Paul, I can have you pick up there. It seems to me, looking at your background a bit, you went from a bunch of different experiences around universities, but more specifically around entrepreneurship and invention, and found that being in a research institution and thinking about the research side actually was a piece to the puzzle for the innovation you wanted to drive. Can you talk a little about your own progress and then what you saw or see in the value of the university research?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think, Michael, earlier on you were asking about how many times you get the question of, what do you guys do during the summer? It is really very true. People think that the university kind of shuts down, but the university is this unique place where it is 24/7. People are always working, whether they're teaching or engaging in the research enterprise, and it just doesn't stop, and that's one of the reasons I came back, because I was in a company. It was in Sanofi. It was actually, the original company was called Chatham, acquired by Sanofi. And it was a wonderful experience to see how science can be done at scale in a reproducible way to create real meaningful products to the world.
Well, that story about how you went from your, describe your PhD and then why you went to the company and what you did, and describe that stuff. So.
Yeah, so I got a PhD at Rice, and now I work at Rice, but my PhD is in fundamental chemistry and physics. It's nanotechnology, so I worked for a Nobel laureate at Rice, and he was wonderful, Rick Smalley, and I learned how to make very, very small things to make great technology. That's great.
But how small?
Nanoscale small, so it's 10 to the minus 9th, right, meters, but that's going to get into a real rabbit hole that I don't want to go into, but extremely small. But those features and that kind of emergence of quantum phenomenon comes from nanotech, right? And so nanotech was actually, in many ways, born at Rice. My late mentor discovered the buckyball. Now, when he was doing the buckyball, it was really, he was looking at solar plasmas, right? He was just studying, exploring. And then they came upon something called the fullerene, the buckyball, which is a soccer ball, but it's carbon atoms arranged like the stitches on a soccer ball. That's a brilliant thing, and then that opened up a new vista of opportunity. And we started creating companies, and he was actually a pariah in the university at the time, because doing startups inside of a university is actually a closeted activity. And what Rick did was he was not a shy guy. He actually, you remind me a lot of Smalley. He was somebody who pushed the edges. And I think that was very important. And I learned that, but then from that, I went back to industry. After I got married, I thought, well, why don't I get a real job and have a family and leave academia? But when I went to the industry, I learned a lot of interesting things, especially how to take science to scale. And that was the beautiful thing that I got out of industry. And I never really trusted science as much as I do now, after seeing it produced and actually affecting people's lives. So then I came back to the university to see if we could do something more, kind of bring back that knowledge and then infuse that into the university and see what we could do. So I had the opportunity to come back to Rice, and then been asked to now lead our innovation enterprise at Rice.
Yeah, so I'm glad you took us there, because what the panel is about, first of all, the invisible hand. What is this thing called a university research program, but also how it drives innovation. And when President Crow and I first met, I had just finished a stint running a program at Stanford, connecting industry interest with the research around future of technology at Stanford. And at the time, my thinking has evolved a bit, I had thought about this challenge of establishing what the ROI is, right? And everyone would nod from industry and say, ROI, that's awesome, you're finally talking about return on investment. And to the business person, I'd say yes. But to the professor, I'd be saying, no, we're talking about research of interest. You're pursuing questions that drive you. And then why would government get involved? Well, they want results of importance. They're trying to move society forward. And when I say my ideas have evolved, it's a lot in part from working with President Crow and ASU, because all three of those should be something that everyone's thinking about, right? And so inside one university, if you're thinking about all three of those objectives, and this is the way it manifests itself in ASU's mission around, we are responsible for the communities and for the outcomes, et cetera, then all three of those become important. So maybe I can shift us a bit, following on your thread around innovation, and talk about what has come from university research. What have we seen, and that maybe people don't even know to appreciate? Because I think that's one of the hard things. In a number of sessions you've talked about, doing work that's invisible, or delayed gratification for 20 or 30 years, but when you're doing it, no one knows it matters. How do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of weird. So we think of inventiveness by what we can manifestly, visibly observe. So we think about the plow that somebody invented, or the tool that someone discovered, and and invented. And so what people can't see, it's this invisible hand notion, is that the role of high-speed technological development and technology advance in the United States used to explain, in 1900, it explained about 2% of economic growth. Right now, it explains about 85% of economic growth is derivative of some kind of technological advance. And then what people also don't realize is that they used to think about technological advance. They think about, Alexander Graham Bell, building the telephone, or Samuel Morse inventing the telegraph, and they think, well, that was the machine, that was the technological advance. And so now it turns out, since 1990, the vast majority of technologies, the vast majority of technologically based patents, are now based on fundamental academic science. You can't do the patent without having some understanding of the molecule, or this or that, or the nanostructure, or some paper by Smalley and his group at Rice University. And so all of the patents that then have evolved around the processing of nanosystems or the building of nano production tools. And so I was at Rice a few weeks ago, and I took out my iPhone like this, and I said, oh, by the way, everybody thinks this is the genius of Steve Jobs. Yeah, it is the genius of a designer and an integrator of technologies. But even since I gave that this little blurb, I said, well, there's thousands and thousands of academic papers that are in the 10 classes of technologies that are in here, and in the 100 sub-technologies that are a part of those 10 technologies that are in the iPhone. I went back and looked at it. It's many more than that. I mean, it's tens of thousands of academic articles, tens of thousands. It's at least 4,000 academic research groups over decades that laid the foundation from which this technology could emerge. And because it's so many groups over such a long period of time, and it's one step followed by another step, followed by another step, followed by another step, followed by another step, it's literally invisible to anyone that's out there. So Paul, I'll just ask you, for instance, what has happened in your area of science since you were active in your area of science? Just as an example. So you wrote a dissertation.
Yes.
Your major professor won a Nobel Prize. There were lots and lots of articles. All of that led to even some of the things that are involved in these technologies. But how much has changed even since you were a student?
Oh, goodness gracious. The ability, so like what's packed into the iPhone in particular is very interesting. The chipset features that we're building and ascribing into these chips are at the nanoscale. We're able to actually make nanoscale materials in a very sort of scalable way. That was because we were studying this inside of universities for decades and decades. And so your comments were so resonant, and I think that's why it's a viral video, right? So many people know that this is true, and you put it in a way that was very, very clear. For example, like I was looking back after you had said that, I was looking at the iPhone. Not only did we make the nanoscale features and all these sorts of things and the Gorilla Glass and everything you mentioned, some of the patents came out of University of Kentucky, which is my alma mater, right? The capacitive touch, right? That didn't have a practical application immediately to mind, right? But
no, because some crazy professor was working on something about touching something.
Touching something, that's right. Because, nerds are better at sort of remote touching. They don't like to actually interact with people.
All right, I'm going to move the conversation along.
This is true. I mean, we don't. And so you're in your hovel.
Screens.
Yeah, you're in your hovel, and you're working on some curious problem, right? And then somebody picks that up, and that's what's happened. The problem with this sort of model, and I think this is one of the challenges we're facing, is that we want to be able to do it faster, right? Don't wait for a long period of time, but you have to study something deeply in order to actually make it, and that's what we did in nanoscience, right? It was nanoscience and technology that really drove us to get to the point where we are. And we're seeing that both in chemistry and physics and all sorts of materials. But how do you actually accelerate? One example of that, for example, we all went through COVID, right? We wouldn't have gotten out of COVID if it wasn't for university research. It just would not have happened. We would still be in the same sort of bubble that we'd been living in with masks and everything else that we had associated. But it's because of mRNA that was studied for decades before that we were able to get out. And what really happened on the acceleration was it was an infusion of capital and a sort of accordion-like contraction of the process so that we could get out. But if we didn't have the research coming out of universities, it wouldn't have happened. And that's a big aspect of it. And one of the reasons the United States is still known as a great innovative country is because of our universities. It's our universities that have been driving that engine. And people don't know it, but they need to know it, and I think we need to tell that story more.
Yeah, and along those lines, I mean, if I summarize what I'm hearing where I think we are, universities have a lot of rationalizing to do, both in terms of how poorly understood they are, or appreciated, or let people judge whether they should be appreciated, but at least give them the fact. And so that's kind of the PR problem, and the self-reflection about what we could do differently, given the current times and what's needed with the world that's changing so quickly. And so can you think or talk about what you're thinking through in terms of what do you do tomorrow? You run an innovation program at Rice. You're driving a lot on different fronts across ASU. Whether it's the PR side, again, I don't want to be too crass and just say, oh, just talk to people, but...
Well, the one thing that we have to do is we have to find ways in which we can always, always, always explain what it means. So I'll give you 2 examples. So 2 labs that are run by the University of California, one in Livermore, California, one in Berkeley, California. At the Livermore lab, there's a facility there called the National Ignition Facility where they have the most powerful lasers in the world. And they can create using this laser energy. The lasers were, of course, developed by, Charles Towns out of Columbia University 65 years ago. But they use these lasers to recreate the actual dynamic physics and chemistry of a star in combustion, which is called fusion energy. And so they create a fusion event. So 2 years ago, at this National Ignition Facility at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, they made that happen in a way where they produced more energy than it took to create the event, thus demonstrating with certainty that we have the capacity to design and operate small stars as an energy source. Now, there's all kinds of ways that you could make that into the coolest story imaginable, that we just had this breakthrough and it will lead to this kind of outcome in 20 or 30 years because we had this breakthrough and this is what was involved in it and so forth and so on. Billions of dollars of expenditures, tens of thousands of people. Probably that event was as significant as the 1942 chain reaction in the stadium Stagg Field at the University of Chicago, in which we learned about chain reactions of atomic material. Now, because there was a war on, that was secret, nobody knew. You ultimately saw this bomb. We defeated the enemies of democracy. We made these things happen. Everybody was cheering, blah, 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 blah. But now 80 years have passed, and we're no longer attempting to explain things to people in ways that they understand it. Just more recently, at another lab run by the University of California, in Berkeley, California, right up the hill from the main campus, they decided, oh, by the way, to do a small little thing. Why don't I create an element that doesn't exist in nature? I'm going to create this element, 116 is its atomic weight. Oh, by the way, this particular element will have the features of its chemical structure, which will make nuclear waste a thing of the past. Unbelievable. Unbelievable science. I mean, we're creating elements that nature doesn't even create. And so we've become this, we can create stars, we can create elements, we can change the future, but back at the ranch in academia, there's a total lack of ability to understand how to communicate this. It's like, well, it worked this time, it might not work the next time, so then there's the doubters. Then there's the people that say, well, they're too stupid to understand it anyway, why would we explain it to them? And so then there's that mode, and then there's, well, how do we actually explain it? So how do you actually explain that we created a mechanism by which we can create a small star as a source of power on Earth or orbiting the Earth as a source of power? How do we explain that to people? Now, they see it in science fiction, but they have no understanding of what's behind it. So we are unbelievably bad at explaining why we're doing things. And that is one of the biggest problems that universities have. The gap between what they're doing is very different than what the gap was in 1880 And so that gap just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing, and the people keep falling further and further away from understanding what's going on.
And fortunately, Paul, I think that's in your job description, is to close the gap and help figure that out. What are you actually doing day to day? How do you bridge that so that it actually turns into innovation, not just...
I thought it was interesting. Just describe something before you do this, because you and I have talked about this. So how'd you end up at the University of Kentucky, and like, why were you living in that part of the world?
Oh, yeah. So going back even further, so I'm an immigrant. I came from India. My family moved to the United States, and we settled in Kentucky. Originally, it was supposed to, so that my father was a surgeon, and he wanted to go serve in the underprivileged region of West Virginia and Kentucky. So I lived on the border of West Virginia and Kentucky. We went back there to establish some clinics and some aspects of that. And I ended up staying there. Our family really grew up there, and it was a wonderful time just growing up in Appalachia. And so I'm from a deep part of Appalachia that J.D. Vance doesn't go to, so I'm very, very proud Indian hillbilly. And it's a really interesting kind of thing, but that's the American thing, right?
Yes.
You import talent. It's a great magnet for this, right? So we were there, and then from Kentucky, I was doing some research there that caught the eye of people at Texas Heart Institute in Houston. And so they wanted me to stop and take a break from medical school at the time. And I had said no originally to doing that. I wanted to finish medical school. But then it was on the same day as 9/11. So then I left med school and said, okay, I'm going to serve my country for a year and go start this company. And so I did that in Houston. Ended up meeting Smalley in Houston, and he said, why don't you quit medical school and be a real doctor? So I did, and then the rest was history for me to really go into Rice. But it gave me this ability in academia to be able to explore, like crazy stuff, right? The stuff we were doing, and still are doing. There's some really wild stuff that happens in academia, just really great thoughts, great ideas. Like, for example, what you just mentioned was brilliant. Here's another one that we never talk about publicly. So muons. Muons are fundamental particles. They're electrons. Electrons are part of that kind of universe. So if you can think of the periodic table in chemistry is really the story of the electron, right? So if you can do chemistry, you can move electrons around, right? Well, what if you changed the electron and made it a muon, a much heavier particle? Now you can hack the periodic table. This is stuff that people do in academia. No company would ever touch that, right? Because that's not where they go.
And only one person in a million understands what he's saying.
Exactly, right. This is the problem, right? But you want those crazy people who think of something, who have a deep understanding in it, and then communicate it back out. And that's one of the things that academia allows you to do. But we don't do it well on the comms, right? We don't really kind of disseminate it and speak to people with clarity. Some people do. Those are the outliers. But can you actually do that in a bigger way? I get that question all the time in Houston when we're doing these innovations at scale. So a lot of my job is to really kind of build the infrastructure for our faculty and students to do that. Then we set them loose, right? Remove the obstacles inside the university to get that out. But a lot of the job is also very much interacting with leadership across the United States and around the world. I do a lot of work in DC. I do a lot of work in Silicon Valley. We're talking to venture capitalists to try to accelerate our innovations. But all of that is really with the purpose of unlocking what we've discovered in the labs and then trying to get it out to people. That's not the easiest thing to do in this sort of castle that we've built inside of academia. But one of the things that we're doing at Rice, and it's mainly because we have new leadership with President DeRoche and our provost and all of our leadership coming together saying we're not going to do it the same way that we've done it. He wanted to do innovation at scale. I think a lot of it is examples that you've set, Michael, that we can actually do more for society if we come out beyond our hedges and really kind of build these innovation campuses. So that's what we've done in Houston. We have 16 acres of the Ion, which you visited. It is an incredible place, a playground for us to be able to develop new ideas and take it out of the labs and into the real world. And that's something that we're very proud of. And Houston is the largest city in the state of Texas. And I think it's a great partnership that we can forge with different universities, especially ASU, to do that.
Yeah, and in that context, how do you think about the role of the university needing to do more versus figuring out the interface between university and industry? And so, like, does the university or the researcher have to be all things to all people, or do they have to make themselves more accessible so that the venture capitalist can come in, or that the student can leave with their invention and go grow it in the world?
So the university researcher needs to be put into a situation where they are unencumbered. They don't need new languages. You don't need to train them in new ways. They need to be able to focus on that which they are uniquely qualified to do. And then around them, there needs to be these, in fact, they need to be as unencumbered as is possible. They need to be given what they need. They need to be left alone. They need to teach their students, and then it needs to be really others that are out explaining the why, explaining what it means, helping to build the linkages, helping to make these things happen, so that those individuals which happen to be operating at this level, like your major professor, so he's an individual who could do something that no one else could do. When you have someone that can do something that no one else can do, you should let them do that.
Yes, that's right.
And then there were the people that built him, you know, the science that led into what he was able to do. So you need to let that system run, but we need to find ways to hold it much more accountable for, in my view, very, very important is American success. And that means making certain that these technologies that might emerge, making certain that this scientific underpinning leads to solutions, because the scientists will just be interested in for the most part, just interested in the curiosity. Someone else has got to figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah, that someone else is the big critical part of it, right? I think universities that have now sort of reconstituted themselves in this sort of Reformation moment that we're having is, how is it that we can help get that information out the door and get it to the world? Instead of waiting 100 years for your innovation that's been published in a paper that barely anybody reads, how do you actually get it out? And that's absolutely right. We have to let these extremely talented individuals be able to do what they do. And then as a university, we have to build structures to enable others to take it forward. We've studied entrepreneurship very, very deeply for decades. It's not the professor that actually does the company, right? It's the students or the postdocs or the people that they've inspired to go out and take it into the real world. And that is not only good, I think it's actually needed. It's a social contract we've had with the United States government since the end of World War II, that we would get funded by the feds to be able to do the work and then give back and provide goods and services to society. We haven't directly done that. We've done that through papers and patents and people that we produce. But can we do more? And I think that is something that we're connecting up to, and that's where the innovation side.
So the point that Paul was making. So during right as World War II was evolving and the Americans were about to enter the war, President Roosevelt talked to a guy who was the head of the Carnegie Institution of Washington, who had been the vice president for research at MIT in the 1930s, who had been the founder of the Raytheon Corporation decades before that, who was a double degree graduate of Tufts University, who then became an MIT professor, a guy named Vannevar Bush. And Bush created a structural design in which he said, I will find a way to tap into all of this talent in academia so that you will have some chance of accelerating the means by which we can win the war with the fewest casualties possible on the American side. And the result of that was so astounding, was so overwhelming, the things that were built from proximity-based fuses to cryptographic code activities to atomic weapons to all kinds of other things, that at the end of that they said, well, we've got to keep this going. So that was 80 years ago. This is this contract that was made. Now that's run its course. And that needs to now be reset and redesigned and reinvigorated. But it doesn't do away with the fact that once tapped into, these universities then produce things, oh, by the way, the internet, semiconductor technologies, semiconductor processing, microchips, theories, all the things that are going on.
I'm going to throw in the social sciences too. As a PhD in psychology, I think, one of the things, my whole career has been about leveraging technology. So I'm a big believer that is a lever for good in just about every discipline or arena. But the interesting thing is the social sciences, if you can't get somebody to adopt the technology or believe in it or trust it, it doesn't matter. And so other areas, I think—
Trust in particular.
Trust in particular, and that's where some of the other research, again, it's not the sexy thing that I've got my phone in my pocket and I can do something new, but in concert, I think those are working. So new regime, new world order, new need for a contract. Any last words about what that looks like? What would you advocate for? How do we make it clear how compelling a proposition it is? Whether to the students we're trying to get to be the future researchers, whether to the faculty doing the research, whether to the people believing in the universities and trusting that goodness is—
Everything has to be explained so that my dad, after he left the Navy, was a truck driver, so that my dad could understand it. My dad was a smart guy, but he wasn't well educated, and so he didn't, but he did understand what things meant. Mm-hmm. And so if we cannot explain what we're doing to everyone, then we're failing, number one. And number two, we've got to understand that this needs to lead to better outcomes for everyone, not just better outcomes for rich people.
Yeah. To add to that, I think there was a Feynman quote about this. Richard Feynman was a famous physicist and educator. He was saying if you can't explain something simply, you simply don't understand it, or some version of that. The idea is that we have to very clearly articulate what it is we are doing. I think trust is a big issue right now, and I think you can only build trust through relationships. And if we wall ourselves off, we're not building those relationships with society. I think there are incredible heroes inside of academia, and that's the kind of thing that we need to show people, who our heroes are, what we're doing to help save the world with what we do every day. As soon as we show that, I think a lot of people will come back and see the deep value of what innovation really means across the United States.
I think that's a great note to end on. So if you can join me in thanking both our panelists, and we'll call that a wrap.